Very grateful to welcome to the stage, if they want to come on up, Elena Muslar is going to be our moderator, also has been a part of our convening committee. I'm going to vamp while they come up and take a seat to acknowledge our other convening committee members who worked with us over many months. Indira Goodwine, like the wine that you drink, Arnie Tunstall, Nicole Mullet, Silas Reiner, Raja Feather Kelly, Haley Smizer, Kat Wentz, and Jennifer Edwards, all worked with us as convening committee members. Special thanks goes out to the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation as the lead sponsor for this program. You can find more program information, bios for our speakers and artists today by scanning the QR code. Thank you, Keisha. Keisha, Christy, Mika, Sarah, Megan, the entire NCCAkron team and volunteers wouldn't have happened this week without them. Extra special thank you to them as well. Laura was stepping outside. Okay, see, I saw you back there. And we also had additional support to make this week happen from the National Endowment for the Arts. They came in late, but they still came in. Right? You know, we submitted last July, and then they confirmed in April, which, you know, this was going to happen regardless. But we appreciate that too. All right, regardless what their timeline was. So I'm going to turn it over and really encourage y'all. Thank you so much for being generous and open and transparent and vulnerable, because this is all still a work in process. But at NCCAkron, we love process. So let's do it.
Y'all can hear me? I don't know if I'm just projecting or, oh, it's working. There we go. My theater voice. Hello, everyone. I'm super excited to be here. As Christy mentioned, I'm Elena Muslar, and we're just going to chat. We're going to have a chat about where money and mindset is in conversation with each other, and where we sit with, you know, the realities around what power money holds over us as artists, as administrators, and how are we in dialogue with that in a healthy and conscious way. So I'm excited to dig into this with my panelists here, my illustrious panel, about, you know, where the motivation sits besides the need to make rent, besides, you know, all of the things that are the basic necessities. Like, where do we actually start to think about what money can do for us, or what we don't need to accept money for? So for me, this conversation is really looking at how are we internally shaping and shifting our relationship to money and the power that it has within us, over us, based in our decision-making skills or even our own sense of self-worth. And also, like, what is the value of the work that we do, and who is it that has access to that valuable work? How do we shepherd that access? How do we decide when we do share access or when we don't, in terms of the impact we want to have on the world as artists? So I'm excited to dig into this with these wonderful folks, and they have an idea of some of the things I'm going to ask them, so we'll see what they say. So let's kick it off. So my first question, or really invitation, is if we could just go down the line and just share with us your name, so everyone know who's who, even though they, you know, the QR code and the bios and whatnot. Your name, and then 2 or 3 words, I like 3 if you can get there, do it. If not, all good. That explain, like, what grounds you or anchors you in your creative practice. Just to get an idea, a sense of, like, what's the footing we're each on here. All right, you want to take it away?
Cool, I can take it away. Hey,
Thank
y'all.
you.
My name's Antoine Byers. My pronouns are he and him. I'm from Lenape-Hoking, New York. And 3 words that ground me are community, curiosity, and ancestors.
I love that. Thank you. Community, curiosity, and ancestors. Perfect. So keep that in mind as Antoine answers questions, like where that sits, and then what are those decisions that come out of understanding that grounding, that framework for you. Continue.
I was hoping, is this on?
It is.
I was hoping I would go last so that I could like do a little plagiarizing on the way. But I really, the only word that really comes is the ocean. Like that's the first word. It could be, if it could be 3 words, I'd say it 3 ways, but the ocean, ancestors, and joy.
Wonderful. Yeah.
I'm Jumatatu. My pronouns are flexible. I'm currently living in Durham, North Carolina. You live there too? Oh, really? Yeah, I'll be there. After a long time in Philadelphia, and then I'm originally from California.
Represent West Side.
Where are you from?
I'm from South Central LA. Where you from?
I was born in San Jose. I lived in Santa Cruz, Sacramento, San Diego.
Oh, you just
Oceanside,
came all the
Riverside.
way down, but skipped my area. Okay.
I've been doing a lot of genealogy work and learning just how much movement for generation. I mean, the kind of larger communal migration patterns, but just how much movement there's been. And so I identify as a voyager. That's not one of my words.
I was like, where the word at? You gonna tie this together for it? No.
Okay, so my words are transformation, care, and confusion.
Great. Yeah, but you're inspired. You're not stealing. You're inspired. Yes, thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Jumata.
Hi, everyone. My name is Indira Goodwine. My pronouns are she, her. I currently reside on Lenape land in New York City. And I have to start by saying this to give framing, of course. So I'm an artist before I'm an administrator, before I'm a funder. And I think it's important to just acknowledge all of the things that hopefully I will bring to this conversation. And with that, I'm going to use a dance analogy. So everyone who's a dancer in this space knows about rice, right? Come on, rest, ice, compression, elevation. And this is usually used if you have some sort of injury and you're looking to have a space of healing to get over that injury, right? And possibly increase your flexibility. So for me, I've shifted that in my work to stand for responsibility, integrity, compassion, and enthusiasm. So in my work as a funder, those are things that ground me.
Yes, come through. So I just created a poem, y'all. That's why it was just all about poetry right here. Poetry in motion. I really love the way that you've redefined that and reclaimed that for yourself. And as a way to, in a way, I think it's interesting because it still keeps you grounded in where you came from, in what you started with.
And I mean, I think the thing for me is also when we think about creative practice, even in administration, we still have creative practice. And one of the things for me that's really important is how I start my day. So as much as I'm not warming up in the studio anymore, there's still a warm up to do administrative work.
Oh, yes.
Right? Outside of, yes, the training and the skill set and all of that, there is still a certain mindset that you need to have when you are thinking about the ways in which you want to impact the artists, the communities, the presenters, the larger ecology that you work with. And so for me, doing that is, yes, keeping me in, ooh, I'm still a dancer first. And so how do I bring all of that even when I'm at this desk,
Yes.
when I'm in these meetings, how do I bring all of that? So it's very important.
Yes, it's that impact in conversation with what's the form of interaction that you choose to have, and how have you invested in yourself first in order to engage at that level. And that investment is a different form of what we're talking about. Like, what is that investment of self that we have to do in order to do the work that we're meant to do? So as y'all think about maybe some of the experiences you've had with whatever hat you wear, I think we're all artists, we're all administrators, we're all of these things, whether you like it or not. it's just how much of that do you choose to do, or how much of that do you delegate in terms of your work and your responsibilities. So as you're thinking about the responsibilities you hold with whatever seat of power you come from, what's an experience that's maybe tested you in your work, in your practice, in your creative practice? Okay. Well,
Ancestors.
yes, they said the test is here. All right, so yeah, like what's something that tested you in your work, and maybe what did you have to invest or pour into yourself to help you navigate through that situation? Jumatatu, I see you like you're, no, I'm just like watching the memory like wash over you, and I'm curious.
Oh, okay. Like Antoine.
Yes, indeed.
So we got this question in advance, and there were a couple of different options that I was thinking about. I feel like the one that you saw washing over my face. In the fall of 2021, the group of artistic collaborators and myself that had been working on a series of projects called Let Him Move You, were touring to 6 cities. Mm-hmm. One of those cities was Portland, Oregon, with an institution called PICA, Portland Institute for Contemporary Art. And what we were doing there's different elements to this project. It's a project that is grounded in Black majorette culture and dances, coming from the South and southern U.S. states. And there's kind of 3 prongs that we were focused on performing within the spaces that house kind of these, like art institutions, black box theater spaces, white box gallery spaces, converted warehouse spaces, and then also the kind of audience following the cultural hegemonies present in the architecture, in the kind of cultivation of audience communities, in the relationship between where the institution is and who's been displaced for it to be there. That aspect. Then there's the second prong is performing outside on sidewalks and in alleyways in Black communities, whether that's historically Black or predominantly Black, getting ready to be historically Black, you know. And then what are and then the third prong is the queer party space, whether that's a club space, and that the performance is usually the most stealth, you know, like secret, and almost nobody knows is going on, unless they're really looking for it.
Under the current.
And in each of those, we're thinking about what is the intervention happening with this group of Black queer performers that we're doing these majorette dances in these spaces, dealing with the kind of possibilities and limitations that are prepared to meet us, and then what do we do when we get there? So importantly, we were dealing with the outdoor element of the work. I don't know if have people been to Portland, Oregon? Okay, yeah, so, like that kind of what that's giving, there was a major, so the performance route is over the course of about a mile, and we passed through Dawson Park, historically Black Dawson Park, which has been, revitalized by the city so that all the Black people can leave, and et cetera. All of those rhythms that are happening all across the world. All across the world. We have been working with all of the presenters on the tour for a very long time to try to enable the understanding that this work is created with the witnesses that come to see it, and we need a whole lot of Black people in those spaces. And like everybody seemed down, and I don't think that we were naive going into it. We knew that it was going to be a lot of work. We had hope, and also we were prepared to do a lot of work to be able to realize these works. What we weren't prepared for was the kind of white parade that was ready to meet us in Portland for the performances, which we performed in Portland. We've never seen an audience composition quite like what we saw the day of the first performance.
Wow.
And the day before, when we were walking through the performance route through Dawson Park, we had already been confronted with some of the hostility that we're always prepared for doing this work.
Yeah.
It was particularly heightened for us to be in, like just very casual, like sweats and stuff like that. Not even really doing the choreography except for this like little march step that we were doing. And already there's a group of ostensibly cis men, black cis men who were just not having it. God, I'm talking so long. Sorry.
This is important, and what I would love for you to kind of center on too is, you said there's a certain amount we're usually prepared for.
Yeah.
I'm curious if you can pinpoint what is the preparation version.
Yeah.
And then what were you unprepared for, and how did you navigate through that unpreparedness to get to the other side?
For this group of performances, we're consistently working with community de-escalators from the different, who have direct relationships to the performance routes, who have much more information about what it is to be in those spaces.
Okay.
As we're traveling through, as we'll pass through and then we'll leave, performing with local performers who will stay.
Gotcha.
And so, what that kind of, how to be prepared for the kind of residue that we'll leave. And then we always have our own internal de-escalation practices and just protection practices that we'll do to get ready for the performances, checking in with one another about how each of us wants to be protected and how we're willing to offer protection.
Great.
And then also the protection, the getting ready of being in those spaces, going on those routes, talking to people that we'll meet, going to the city a couple of times before, and it's so that's the preparation.
Protection is a part of your creative practice in and of itself.
Yeah.
And when you were met with this environment that wasn't what kind of like your layers or levels of protection had gotten to, what was the thing that helped your community, your group get through it?
So when we got there, there was a big eruption, because it's this very black queer aesthetic in the front of the parade, followed by this, hipster whiteness, behind us, into this park where lots of people had been displaced from, and so there's this eruption. And one of the things that we did, the first thing that we did with the three performers that were centralized in that moment, we looked at one another to have that moment of check-in, to remember what we had done to prepare for this, to remember the protections that we were offering into this space, that we were asking for. And then we looked to the community de-escalators, and then we continued. We continued with the performance. We trusted that this was going to resolve itself in the way that we could, and we trusted also that we need to continue moving this through as quickly as the performance will allow, because it's to avoid any more violence than the ones that were already the one that had already erupted verbally, emotionally.
So was that trust the thing that you would say is what guided you through to the other side? So I think that's really interesting to sit with for a moment, like the conversation between like all of these elements, being prepared with the ability to know what de-escalation feels like within your group, within your community, to have that already set, to understand what are protective measures, to then move into remembering those protective measures when you're threatened in environments that, creative practice isn't just this fun, like, la la la, I get to go dance in the streets. You know, it's, you are moving minds, you are changing culture, you are impacting societal shifts. And that work, you have to be mentally ready for it. Yeah, mentally, spiritually, emotionally, physically. And what we call that is MEPS. Like, I like to do check-ins with people at the beginning of facilitation practices where it's like, where are you at?
Yeah.
Mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually.
Yeah.
And remembering your MEPS, like in these environments, can be the difference between if they feel like you're actually quote unquote successful, because successful doesn't always have to be tied to that monetary, you know, what you're receiving in that monetary way. So I appreciate you sharing that, because that's a big part of how we can then get to doing the work that pays us what we deserve and understands the value of it, understands that you're literally at the level of, in my opinion, you know, law enforcement. Like, you are going into communities and, you know, 50, 60, 70, 80% of different city budgets go to our law enforcement. But here we have an artist putting their life on the line for the betterment of our societal health. And so how do we reframe what the work is to you know, cities, to government officials, to whoever we're trying to get money from, to really understand what is the work that we're doing and why is it important and what is the value that really should be tied to it. Which brings me to my next question. Do any of you feel like the mission that you're on within your creative practice, is it in conversation with financial liberation? And if so, how is that something that's within you yourself, or is it something that you do in service to others, like your work is related to financial liberation, or is it something that you've really been conscious of within your practice? It's open to anybody. Yeah.
I'll quickly say that a big part of like what I do is try to pass on whatever information I have to my community. So how I resonated with the last question, and what stuck out to me was like protection of community. So I just kind of wanted to name that, because that's my challenge. Is it's easy to like take the anti-racism workshop, or maybe not easy, but like it's how do you take those skills and then actually show up and do it. So that's been just how I wanted to kind of respond to that. And then remind me of the second question again.
Yeah, just like where, because whatever resonates within you in terms of your creative mission, how is that in conversation with financial liberation for yourself or for the community that you serve?
Yeah, so like really tangibly, I teach budgeting basics for dancers, right? So I think that dancers, black folks.
Bring that mic, boo.
Sorry. Dancers, black folks, a lot of folks maybe don't have as much access or education around finances, money, and all of those things. So somehow I was able to acquire that information through research, studying, taking different workshops. And once I realized that that was something that I saw was lacking in our community, I tried to figure out ways that I could bring that. So teaching it on different levels at different universities, but also offering it for free for folks, because how are you going to acknowledge that like the community is lacking an understanding of some of these financial things, but then also make it inaccessible for them to get that information.
Yes.
So yeah, that's how I resonate with that question really tangibly. And it shows up in a lot of different ways in the work that I do, but that's like a really specific way that shows up.
That's great. Does it show up for anyone else in terms of like how are you in conversation with financial liberation in your work? I saw breaths come in and let them release. Indira, take it away, and then you bring us home.
Yeah, so it's interesting for me because when I think about financial liberation within the institution that I work in, I also think about the fact that we're working in systems and structures, even though we're trying to change them in philanthropy. Right, so there's a desire to have financial liberation in the work, and then for me personally, I recognize I sit in a seat of privilege in the role that I have at the organization, right, and I recognize the individual people who helped me to get there as well as the community, so I'm always looking to them in some ways for guidance, but also to be in deep listening, right? Because I recognize that's a part of what I have to do within my work to then come in and try to change the policy and change the thing and make sure it's accessible and make sure that we're equitably distributing resources, right? Because we know that that hasn't been happening, not only in certain parts of the country as far as dance is concerned, but certainly within certain forms and aesthetics, whether they're well-known or emerging and being, newly created. So it's interesting, and it's definitely a push and a pull because we're still, working in a specific system as much as we're trying to break out of that. And so even institutions, I believe, are looking for financial liberation. They might not all say this. I will speak on behalf of my organization. There's a space within that we're looking to have so that we can do better work and better service for the artists and communities that we want to empower and support within their artistic endeavors.
Yes, I love that you're bringing in that institutional perspective because so often I think it can feel for people that the institutions are over here and I as the artist am over here. But in reality, the artist is in the institution. There are people who want to liberate and upend the systems and the structures that people are mad at every day. So that's a constant dialogue.
My role, because it's, as you said, like the artists are here, the institution is here, and specifically at NIFA, we are what you call an intermediary, right? So we have funders, right? So as much as for artists who might receive a grant from the organization, they're like, you are the funder, which like, yes, and actually we still submit proposals to get funding.
Yes.
We still also have final reports to do.
Yes.
And so we do empathize with the artists when they have questions about certain systems we have in place, and we want to try to make those as easy as possible. And at the same time, recognizing that we're in a shifty place too.
Yes.
And I think that's important to recognize as well, because there is a difference between those foundations that are able to give in that way and then others who might be put under whether certain constraints or certain rules, if you will, in terms of how to redistribute money, right?
Yes.
And so like there's something else to be acknowledged there, I'll say.
Completely. There's always another layer than what meets the eye. What were you going to chime in with?
Sort of like a not fully completed thought.
That's good. We like that.
Yeah.
Express.
Thank you. I don't know if my work it's one of those things where it's like you're working towards something, you're following your gut, you're following your instincts and what your values are, and then maybe 10 years later you zoom out and you're like, wow, I was really focused on community engagement or whatever that is, right? And when the first thing that came to mind with this question of financial liberation is the unpaid labor of dancers.
Yeah.
And it's something I think about all the time as someone who is an employer, sort of, that the amount of labor, commitment, and time of my collaborators that even though I do pay and I try to pay as well as I can, and it's not enough, as we always know, it's not enough. All the classes that dancers take, the parking they pay for, the work that they have to do to be able to be available to me, to collaborate with me, feels like a much bigger question, a much more important question for me. Moving forward, and I think that the pandemic had a way of exposing a lot of those really unhealthy relationships, especially, I didn't say this before, my name is Rosie Herrera, I'm from Miami, I'm a choreographer. My pronouns are she, her, señora. And so in Miami, over the past year and a half, we've had hurricane force gentrification, right? Where we're more expensive than New York City. Yay, Pioneer, we did it.
Wow.
And this has happened over a year and a half. And so the labor or unpaid labor of the collaborators and myself as well, but my collaborators is much more visible because people are just getting pushed out so quickly. There's nowhere to go. There's just nowhere to go. We keep getting pushed out. First it was, of our own communities, and then the other ones, and then another one. And I also recognize artists as arbiters of gentrification as well. But that it's clear. The first thing that comes to mind for me that I my relationship to liberation will always be raw until I feel like I can liberate my family, you know, my dance family. My family too, but my dance family.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. It kind of got me thinking about, because you said family, so that took my brain to generational wealth and like what does
What's that?
Doesn't, so well, you know, it's it's more so thinking about like what do people have access to based on where they are in the generations that came before them, and where does that wealth sit? And so when we look at what equity is, that's a whole other can of worms, because equity isn't about, okay, we're all starting from the realization that equity, diversity, and inclusion exists, and we need to make things better. We're starting from a place where there were people who haven't had access to any resources to be able to live the life that maybe this other person who took the same amount of dance classes had. This person was on scholarship, or this person had to work to take those dance classes, whereas this person's family was able to pay for all those dance classes. And now both of those people have come out and are applying to the same job or in the same company, and now they're making the same, but they aren't really. They aren't. And that same dollar doesn't pay for things in the same way it would if that other person had access to the means that basically the other person did have access to. So when you talk about taking care of your dance family, I think about self-preservation first, like in conversation with financial liberation, and then what does that mean once you
have to put your mask on before you put in the plane. They're always like, adjust your mask before you attempt to put your mask on. Yeah.
And within that context, generational wealth is very much tied to generational trauma. And what is your familial relationship to money? What is your consciousness or understanding of like debt or relationship to, you know, even accepting money, accepting help? Like, how many of us were on welfare, or how many of us had to, you know, have an anxiety around handouts? And our entire arts ecosystem is like based, or nonprofit arts ecosystem is based on asking for money from somebody. And then you look outside and you pass by people who are on the street asking for money. And you think about, what is an artist? You know, when you say, hi, I'm an artist, to any Joe Schmo walking down the street, they're like, oh, they're a struggling artist. Oh, they're a starving artist. And so just like all of the associations that can come with like, what does money even mean to us? And I feel like it's really interesting because you shared that you're also teaching. I teach too, business and the arts. So how have you sort of seen, you know, some of that trauma come up or not, or just like what has your relationship to things been?
So just to your last point,
Yeah.
I like to always say that it's a privilege to be able to work for free. And I say that over and over again because not everybody gets to show up to the free gig, right? You have to have access to something else to make that happen, right? A rich partner, rich family. You also have to have the ability, right, to work those other jobs. We don't talk about that enough.
Yeah, literally, the ableness.
Right, literally. And then just to your second question, I wanted to edit a little bit of what I said earlier. I think that dancers, Black folks, we are financially literate because we've had to be. I think it just doesn't show up in the ways that we praise, right? Like, and we talked about this yesterday. We know how to stretch a dollar, right? Like, so
frugality, and
right,
like what?
Right. So I think, definitely the trauma has come up. I think you just see it in the information that's not there. I think people's relationship with money, that's something I'm also trying to shift. I think that for a lot of people, their money runs them. And I'm trying to teach people how to run their money. So I think it's just kind of shifting the way we view money and our relationship with it. That's been interesting to explore.
Yeah.
Can I also add, like, can we take a minute to just recognize, like, the shame that also comes from having money, and the way that people perform that shame in spaces and artist spaces? Like, that's daunting, you know, and you feel it, and you know, like, and this happens to me a lot It's like the one dancer I have that has like, that doesn't work and has like a wealthy husband and blah, blah, blah. She's the one that's like, are you gonna be reimbursing my luggage? And I'm like, you want me to perform that I don't know, that you don't have to fucking work? Don't make me do that. Don't make, I'll reimburse your luggage, but don't make me have to perform that you're on the same page as this person who's barely scraping by. That is something that I'm coming up against right now. But that it irks me in a deep way that I'm still sort of trying to build language around that and in a healthy way learn how to express what my needs are and what my boundaries are in those spaces, because that shame is palpable. I don't know if you guys have felt it, you know, and how it changes a creative process.
Yeah, like a version of that for me is like, I think there just needs to be more transparency.
Yeah.
That feels important to me. Like an example is, I used to dance in a company, didn't make enough money, right? But I had a colleague who lived in Midtown, right? And it was a second company connected to a school, so people could look at us and you'd think, oh, you got into that company, so you get to live on 55th and 9th, right? So I think that's why the transparency is important, because there's a lot of younger folks who are looking to this, and it's like, oh, this plus this equals that, and then you get there, and that's not what it is. So that's what came up in that for me.
I agree.
Yeah, I'm glad you offered that. Chumatatu, something's on your mind.
I think maybe for the past 7 or something years, I've had this projects talking about transparency and also shame. When I was a younger artist, all of that stuff was so mysterious, how people put these things together, all the kinds of hidden wealth that people were coming into. Hidden much more than the kind of, you know, like the some of the more obvious systemic patterns that people are a part of and interaction with. And so I've been working on this project of just having, publishing all of the creation budgets for the different projects that I've been working on for the past 7 years, just because it's, you know, I always had questions about like, oh, well, what are people paying other people? You know, what are like people in the lead artist position paying other collaborators, all that stuff, and you know, how those elements work together. And then we've recently, when I'm talking about I work with Mariah Weathers as a managing producer, or I think we. Is it okay? That's
Like, titles.
the titles, yeah. But recently we've been putting up the touring budgets too. So to see, like, you know, what percentage of this money to be able to make this tour possible is coming from grants that we've gotten, or from the contribution from the presenters and stuff like that, to demystify some of that stuff. And I'm always I think about transparency a lot. I don't even know if it's the right word necessarily anymore. I think I might need to use a new one, because it just feels like it's so popular, I don't even know really what it means anymore, or what direction that it's going in service of what. And for me, trying to make logical sense out of, you know, out of a basis that exists within capitalism, I'm not doing that anymore. One of the this choreographer, Nora Chipomire, one thing that she told me one time was, in talking about, you know, like I was working on a grant proposal and I had all these ethical concerns, whatever. And she was like, I'm paraphrasing, you know, so you better get this money, you know, because you shouldn't have to be applying for it anyway. It's being held within these foundations, within these, what are they called? Like the big, like,
institutions.
Endowments.
Yes.
You know, all of these places. That money, those resources were acquired from all kinds of evil manipulation. It shouldn't belong there anyway. It doesn't belong there anyway, and the fact that we have to apply for it, you know, and especially when I'm talking to Black and Indigenous Turtle Islanders folks about, like, you working on budgeting and stuff like that, I'm trying to come from the place of, okay, let's get this money, let's acquire these resources, you shouldn't have to be applying for it anyway, so let's try and focus. Yes, those ethical concerns are important. Put them where they belong. Look at this as the process of getting money.
And also, I think it's knowing that the money is already yours. Coming in with that mindset rather than I'm asking, I'm hoping, I'm proving. No, you do great work. And the more that you're just clear and confident in what that work is, I think application isn't the word that should even be used in terms of what it is. It's almost like they're brokering access to funds that should be redistributed to the people that are doing good work. And it's also it shouldn't be a judgment on the work. When I'm on these grant panels, the one thing I don't like is anything that is a judgment to the work. The work, it needs to be done, no ifs, ands, or buts. The money shouldn't be tied to like why you do the work. It should just be, here's the money because you do the work. Thank you for that.
I'll take it a step further. Like for me, whose money is it anyway?
That's what I'm saying.
Who earned that money? And I'm not talking about 10 years ago. I'm talking about 100 years ago, maybe 2 or 3, right?
Yeah,
That's what comes up for me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think what you were getting at around transparency is really interesting, because I felt excited about the demystification of things like that. I think it's a radical word that I think we're looking for. It's not about transparency, it's about like breaking open this access to knowledge.
Intimacy almost. It's like shared vulnerability in this way, you know.
But it's I don't know. For me, it's rougher than that. It's like there's a fight that's happening, and we're in that constant fight to make sure that we're bringing up other people into an environment where they understand what they need to know. Yeah, Indira.
And I'll just offer too. I don't even know that it's a fight. I'm tired of fighting.
Yeah, that's fair.
I mean, even with all of the different experiences that I've had, yes, I'm still tired of having to fight. There are some things, as my grandmama would say, that you just gotta burn at the root.
Yes.
You just gotta burn it at the root, and that's where we have to go to. And I think about the opening plenary with Mark Bermuda Joseph talking about like these different 4 areas as we think about a visioning for the future. And for me, the growth and collapse space that we were kind of talking about, even as the most challenging one was the transformative or transformation, but the collapse space is very interesting.
I think we're in that actually right now.
Yeah.
I think we're sitting in the collapse.
Yeah, I think we're
and that's
sitting in
why
the
it's hard for
collapse,
us
for
to
sure.
define it in this moment, and we're searching for words that maybe don't exist yet because we're in the process of creation.
Right. And I think this reimagining that we're going through is very important, but we still also have to get to the action space. So I love being able to talk about let's imagine and let's do that. And it's important to be in a dream space. I love being in a dream space. And then we also have to bring that down a little bit to say, okay, and then what is this next motion we're trying to make to really move this, advance this forward? Because if not, we're going to be stuck in just this, we all know what it could be, what it should be, and then and then what, you know? And so I think that's why, especially during this particular season that we've had, there's been so many conversations about that. And I am always interested, and I feel honored when I'm in conversations with artists who at least feel like they could give it to me real. And maybe that's the relationships that I build with them. And I appreciate that so much, because all of that information is like, right? Yep. Because the artist will lead us. Like, that's the reality. Even in a space at a foundation, I'm very clear on where, like, yes, I might be the person working strategically to build out the thing, but the thing itself is really from the conversations that I've had with artists to be able to make sure that we're showing up in the way that they need. And that's because that's always changing too. There's not just like, oh, this is what Rosie told me, you know, she needed in 2019. Yeah, that's not the same at the end of 2019, forget, you know what I mean? And I mean, we're trying to work through remaining nimble, remaining honest and in integrity with the way in which we're providing support and wanting to dig deeper. And I think that's gonna always require constant communication and still moving into, okay, and then how, right? Not just the what, but really getting into the how and that pushing.
Yeah, and thinking about that how, we have how to get money as artists in a certain amount of lanes that are most talked about. But I'm curious about what and how are some of the ways that maybe you all have invested in yourselves or in other areas of your work where you've seen a financial return on that investment where it may or may not have been related to whether or not you got a grant. Maybe it's a different stream of income that you created for yourself, or your association to investment. Maybe that investment isn't a monetary thing, but it returned financial dividends to you. Has there been things that have come up for you on that? I see some nods. Yeah, Jumatatu, want to go first?
I'm sorry.
You don't have to. I can pass it right over here. We got folks at the ready.
I was not because of I was at the non-fungible token conversation yesterday, and I was not because I saw friends in the audience and just anyway. For me, I don't know. I haven't figured that out. What I can tell is in 2012 I got this fellowship, and like they'll encourage recipients of the fellowship to go into buying real estate in Philly, and I was less than a week from closing on this triplex, because not just real estate, but a rental property.
Yeah.
I was less than 3 weeks of closing on this triplex. One of the units I was going to live in, and then the other two would be rented out in my West Philly neighborhood, the neighborhood that I had been in for decades. And then I backed out of it because I couldn't make sense of how not to get so swept away in that rhythm of displacement, knowing that, okay, the rents that I'm gonna have to charge, are going to contribute to all of that stuff. And at the time, I didn't have a strong enough, I didn't have strong enough cooperation or other organizing going on around me to be able to try and make sense of how to utilize that structure in service of the destruction of that structure that needs to happen. I just didn't I wasn't organized in that way with that particular project. So I guess all I wanted to say is that for me, I know that I don't think it's so much about shame, but just trying to make sense of notions coming out of this economy, like passive income earning and stuff like that, that feel like I'm cooking on the flames that everything is burning in. It's really hard for me to be imaginative about that. I can be imaginative about all kinds of things, but it's
a completely different application.
And it makes me, when you were talking, Ndira, I was thinking about just the amount of cooperation that needs to be, so that the people that are really good at dreaming but might not be as good at the hows are in partnership with the people that are doing the hows, and like the kind of that collaboration, it just feels so central to really massively destroying and interrupting all this stuff.
Yes, we're with you. I feel like Antoine was going to chime in.
So for me, the way I'll answer this question is, there's a YouTuber. Her name is Maya Washington, and I was really inspired by her and her work. And one thing she did one year was she was like, I'm going to put myself out there for a year.
Yep.
Every single day and see what happens. And her brand and everything around her grew so much in that year. So my version of that was like getting on Instagram, and I was like, okay, I can't do every day. I can do every other day.
Yeah.
And I posted on my Instagram account every other day, and my life changed through that. So it's like, to answer the question about alternative means of income, I've been able to support myself through social media, also dance, and also admin. And then it's transformed into where I don't even really do that much on my social media channels anymore. I'm trying to get back into it, but burnout is real. But I've also been able to take those skills and apply them to other companies and organizations who can also compensate me for my ideas. So the way I'll answer that question is that for me, it was on this idea of investing in yourself. It's also like understanding what you like to do and what are you into. Because I think you talked about what a lot of dancers do is like Pilates or gyro.
Yeah.
And we love it. If you love Pilates and gyro, you do that Pilates and gyro, but I don't love Pilates and gyro. So I have to find, what do I like, right?
Yes.
I don't want to fall into these things, and it's about how can I monetize my passions, right?
Exactly.
If we're going to be capitalistic about it, right? How can I monetize my passion? So I like administration, right? I have a knack for like organization and all those things. And I'll step back. I think as a dancer, and we talked about this yesterday, I used to be so embarrassed that I did things other than dance. Like so embarrassed that I was good at other stuff. But once I started to lean into those skills that I had, my whole life changed. My life got more comfortable. I was able to support myself off of all my skills, not just dance, right? So not just continuing to go to this industry and this place that you want support from, but maybe doesn't have it from you. I explored other things that I was able to do to support myself. So yeah, social media is like the example, but I say that not that, and I always like to be clear about this, whenever I talk about the things I do, it's not so that everyone can go and do exactly what I do.
Yes,
that's
it's
not
find your version.
Right, because that's not what I did. I didn't do exactly what everybody else was doing. I found what I liked and started doing that and found ways to monetize that. So like, I use that as an example, but I encourage people to find your thing and try to figure that out,
Yeah, when I'm working with clients, the way I define that for them is there's a difference between your creative career and a complementary career. And understanding not about shame around, oh, my day job or plan B or backup plan. Like I came from South Central LA, wasn't no options for no backup plans. I just needed to have my ducks in a row. And so how many ducks do I need? And what's the row we're gonna create?
The last thing I want to say too is like, so I think what it felt like sometimes for me is that, like, say I'm talking about dance, activism, entrepreneurship, which is like 3 titles I use to describe myself. It felt like sometimes I had to figure out how I could fill one cup with all of those things. But this came up to me this morning thinking about, we went to El Patron yesterday, and I was trying to figure out which margarita I wanted, right? But then I saw that there was a margarita flight. So I didn't have to pick one margarita. I didn't have to ask for them to put 3 things in one cup.
Fly, honey, fly.
Right? I can order 3 of the margaritas,
Yes,
okay?
yes.
So I think it's less about how can I fit all this thing in one cup, but what if I have 3 cups that I can fill up as much as I want?
And you have 3 different conversations you're currently in dialogue with, and you're growing at different paces at different levels in each of those areas. And what I offer a lot is sort of thinking about, can that complementary career aid your creative career? So is there knowledge that you don't have yet that you still need, that if you do this career where they're like, we're always hiring, or we always need bookkeepers or whatever, and you're like, dang, I don't know jack about bookkeeping, but look at this program that needs more black bookkeepers. I guess I'll do that because they're going to let me do it for free, and that's going to help me understand how to better manage my money. Like, finding things to help your other thing can also allow you to feel more confident and lose some of that shame in the process, or shed it. And because I think we're in a period of like releasing right now, because that's also like, it's not just about financial liberation, it's also, what does financial health look like? Like, knowing that version of yourself that you do want to be, or that you want your company to be, map that out. And do you have the tools or the words to even do that?
On both sides of the spectrum.
Exactly.
Both those that have a lot and those that have not, because the shame that I have never felt shame about being poor and working, but the shame that I have dealt with the most as a creator is the shame of people who have not had the same journey as me, who are very privileged and really uncomfortable with sort of dissecting what that is. Granted, I can't just, like I've done before, like go take this workshop, or I can't do that for everyone, but that feels like a heavier, what is financially healthy for the institutional large organizations? What is that health for them spiritually, emotionally, and how do they bring that energy into different rooms? So not just us, but who's asking the Mark Morrises and the Alvin Ailey's and the large organizations, what do you carry into those rooms? Like, those questions need to be asked. Because I feel sometimes like, for when you're an artist, people are just like, oh, so you're an artist, so like I don't know, when they're like, oh, the person that's criticizing you should get out of the way of the person getting it done. It's like, you should do this, you should do that, you should do that. It's like, I'm drowning. I'm a full-time choreographer, and that is amazing, but the cost has often been me. And so I hear these ideas and I'm like, oh, these are amazing, but the capacity to start to do those things. Like, for example, I love being a panelist. I like, not just this, but just like reading applications and stuff. And the reason I started doing it, I mean, I'm sure I was a diversity hire for a while, but like, the reason was because I'm like, I took it super seriously. I was like, oh, I applied for this grant 5 times before I got it. I'm gonna look at this video with all of my heart. And I'm gonna look at this budget and be like, why did she not pay herself? And because I could empathize and put myself in that role. So even outside of, like you said, Antoine, finding something that you cared about or that you liked, but it's also the care with which you do the work that you're already doing. And I think Tim, who had said this earlier this week, like that way of thinking, that dreaming way of being is an asset. It's a huge asset. And we find our way of making that work for us. I'll give you an example. I was a part of this, I don't know what I was doing. I guess I was a choreographer, a movement consultant for a company, a theater company. And the director was like rough, he was like giving a lot of exercises to the artist and not really giving them a lot of information, and then just being like, well, that's not it, do it again. That's not it, do it again. That's not it. And it was like 4 hours. And they were so drained and they were so exhausted, but he wasn't saying what wasn't working. So I was just like, hey, you seem really frustrated. Why don't you take a break and I'll take over? Yeah. I mean, you would have thought I slapped him in the face. He was like, well, no, and I was like, okay, it's fine. And the artists that were in that room said to me later, because now I'm working with them on a separate project, that moment of you with care approaching him and saying, I recognize that you're frustrated and I'm here to help, and also I know what I'm doing. Yeah. And give me and delegate, because I know how to take over as well, made them realize like how toxic that relationship was with that director. And so they changed that relationship. They're like, yeah, when you totally laid into him. I was like, laid into him?
You're like,
I was like, honey, are you okay? You seem frustrated. Why don't you take a break? It wasn't like I was like, go outside, calm down.
Take a minute, take a seat.
Clearly, I was just with care, but that was radical in that moment. So,
but I think that's really interesting to think about, like, what does care look like in this work, in this, what we've identified as really heavy, dramatic, intense, emotionally charged labor. Like we're trying to get paid for the labor, but then there's the labor in understanding the labor that we're trying to get paid for. So that, and it's also, where do we carve out the space? What does capacity look like to learn? If we're going to learn all these dance steps, like, do we take 10 minutes at the end of each rehearsal to start talking about some things that we just need to know as a community? And like, what does collective learning look like to not just change ourselves, as an individual trying to understand what do I need to do, but like, how do we change the field? How do we change our community? How do we change our little group of artists so that we're in dialogue, or we're absorbing the information that we do need in order to start to make more informed decisions? Yeah. And so when we think about, resources that we may or may not have access to, or things that we've sought out, have there been resources or concepts even that you're currently looking at or trying to explore or understand better right now to shift yourself into a more comfortable place with how you manage your financial liberation?
Would you repeat that one more time?
Yeah, let's see if I remember what I said.
Okay.
But really, I guess what I'm getting at is, what resources have you either sought out, or are there concepts that you're currently trying to unpack for yourself to deepen that commitment, if you feel like you are committed to your own financial, growth, liberation, release, whatever?
I think for me, one of the things in working collaboratively and working with performance and working within these modes that have to do with communication with people is calibrating the resources, the budgets, et cetera, so that they are in consideration of the time that it gets to take to get to know somebody. With the relationships between the group of artists and the people at the institutions, the group of artists, and the people that are sending money to the work, with the group of artists and the people that are witnessing the work. You know, what is the time that it takes to get to know people? And it's a lot, you know. And then trying to, and then for me, it's been about, for Mariah and I, it's been about making sure that the people that we're going into partnership with have an understanding of what that investment is.
Yes.
And how much it costs. Sorry, I hate putting it that way, but I mean it costs something because we have expenses that are accumulating, every day based on this construction of time that we're within.
It makes me think of like COLA or whatever. Like what's the cost of living increase that artists get, and how are you starting to budget for that, or even thinking just about there's resources like Glassdoor when you look for a job and you're like, well, what did they make or what did they say about the job, and we can go and look that up easily. And as I was listening to you, almost like, well, what's the version of that? And you were talking about how you have your transparency in the budgets and like these sort of things that exist, but like how can we break open the system so that there's more understanding, more care, so there can be a collective concern rather than these like silos of concern that are all still trying to talk to each other about like, well, what can we do from the seat that I sit in? What can I do from the seat that we sit in? But where's the collective dialogue and conversation so that there's the care involved? So I really appreciate you kind of bringing that up. Anyone else want to chime in with like what resources either you've sought out or concepts you're now reconsidering as you're moving through your financial journey?
I just want to follow up that if it's not overtly stated, as you are both exploring, if it's not overt, it will not happen.
Yeah.
And we brought up the work of Emily Johnson and the decolonization writer, that there is the having that information, having it written down means that the organization is like signing. There's so many, when we enter into a space, there's all these like unwritten contracts like that are just sort of understood. But having that, it really does change the way that people engage with you. So like, I just want to say like that I really appreciate those things being stated, being written down, and being overt, because it will not happen otherwise.
Yeah. Anyone else?
What's coming up for me is just kind of to respond what Jumatatu said. This stuff costs money.
Yeah.
I think that we think the whole idea thing is going to be free, and I'm like, open your purse, right?
Yeah.
This costs money. Like a simple thing that I talk about at the Met. I'm a regular dancer at the Met. I'm also on the board of AGMA, so we work really hard to be transparent with all of our signatories' contracts so that I can see exactly what a city ballet dancer makes. I can see what an AILE dancer makes. I can see and then you can see why does this apprentice at this company make more than this second-year dancer at this company? But that's like a separate conversation. But I think what's coming up to me about resource, because that's the word I keep hearing, is like getting more clear about what you need.
Yes.
And this is something that Sydney Mosley taught me. It's like, we think it's just money that we need, but when you can actually look at those budget lines and get really clear about what you need, there might be a different path forward that's different than a grant, right? So if I'm producing a piece, what do I need? I need rehearsal space, I need costumes, I need et cetera. And the first thing we think is, okay, I need money to get that. Rather than checking in with your community, with the people around you, to possibly work together and share resources.
Yes.
So that's something, when I think of resources, like that's what's coming up for me, is like really understanding what you need. And it's not just money. And if we can collectively as a community kind of shift that, I think that'll move us to a different place.
Totally. Indira, was there any last words that you wanted to add? And it's okay if
I will add, it's making me think about invoices.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about it too. I was thinking about the line items and how you define those.
It's more so than like the budget, right? Because some of those can be very standard, and it's still questions of like, do I put this here, and how do they know that this is, this is included inside of this? But it also makes me think about when you're invoicing someone, like really being clear about, again, talking about costs and that these ideas cost. I mean, all artists are consultants. Mm-hmm. And we want to talk about how much consultants get paid.
Exactly.
That's what I'm saying. It's like when we really talk about an invoice, like what's my question to artists, and something I guess for consideration as you, in the process of creating a new project or whatever it is that you're doing, is like, what is your invoice?
And also like the basics of negotiation. We have, I think, conditioned ourselves to think we only ask for what we need. Heck no. Y'all better ask for that and then some. You better ask for the moon and the stars so then you get what you need. Your wish, your want, and your walk. Like, what do I wish for? That's the bare minimum that I ask for so that maybe I actually get what I need, and then I can play around with that. And also, the community aspect of this makes me think about cooperative economics, makes me think about, like, what are ways in which we're not just focused on the singular journey, and what is the collective journey, and how are we contributing to that from whatever seat we have at whatever table we're building. And so I love that you brought in the line item part, and I think that's a great reframing for all of us to leave with. It's like, you are not just whatever insert title. You are that, and you are a consultant. So what is your consulting fee? And let it be known. And let it be known.
I'll add to what you just said about negotiation and how that's, very important. Being clear about what's not negotiable.
And then knowing when to walk. You
Right.
don't necessarily need, I get it from somewhere else, because someone else will take you seriously. If they won't, then they'll be like, oh, okay, well, we didn't support them. That's awkward. And so your next ask.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, the non-negotiables are also going to be the things that begin to push the industry in the way that we want to see it reimagined, right? Because if not, then we're all still having the same conversations, and you are just accepting or starting to accept that this is just what it is, and it really doesn't align with your ethos. It doesn't align with what it is that you want to do and the impact that you want to have. And so in order for other things to shift as well, it's got to just be like, well, this is what it is.
Affirm no.
Yeah, and if that's not, in alignment with what, it seems like you want or you desire or you need, then okay, then this maybe isn't the opportunity for me. I'm going to share something that I do say to artists, and, some folks in the philanthropic space may disagree with my approach, and that is fine, but I'm coming from a place of compassion.
Yes.
Filling out grant applications is labor.
Charge.
It is laborsome, right? One of the things that I really encourage artists to do is, like, yes, look at the organization and look at the opportunity. It might not align with what it is that you do. Mm-hmm. And I think because we're sometimes in this scarcity mindset, everybody is trying, so I'm just gonna apply. And I can understand that. And at the same time, the 30 hours, the 40 hours, the 50 hours that you've possibly spent on this one application,
you could have done a different. You could have been on Instagram,
right? You could have had maybe
sponsored.
other ways of getting support, not only for yourself personally, but maybe for some of your creative projects. So I always encourage artists, look at the organization. What are they doing? Is it in alignment with what it is that you want to do? Do you feel like the work that you're doing is really going to be able to be as impactful as you want by having this particular kind of support? And sometimes that answer is yes, and sometimes that answer is no, because maybe that organization has work to do to get on your level.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
And so that power dynamic.
It's the same thing when we look at, what places do we want to be presented at? Like, do they align with us? Do the same thing with your money. Where does it come from? And why do you want to thank them at the beginning of your show? Like, really? So with all of this dialogue that we've had, I think there's a lot here to sit with. One, it's, do I care enough about myself and the journey that I'm on with the community that I have to invest my time, my energy, my spirit into what it really means to build and sustain the work? And am I surrounding myself with the right people to do that, who are learning and leveling up with me? And I think that the more that we commit to this work, the better. for the field at large. And I want to thank the panelists for being open, transparent, vulnerable, and real with us today. And, let's just give everyone a round of applause because it's real. And with that, we got to cut it. So thank y'all. Thank you for coming. Yeah.
How about another round of applause for all of our panelists? I have no more content to throw at you. Anyone else full? Full. This is our last moment all together. Another huge thank you for the time, the labor, the extra effort, the perseverance to get here, to be a part of it. Alina's been on a journey this week, y'all. Thank you. I have a little bit of logistics. Many of you have inquired, like, how am I going to stay in touch with my new friends? Yes, that's part of our vision, is how do we visibilize the network? People are doing this work all across the country. Stay connected. And out of our many intake surveys, I'm looking at Kat, who did that labor. Yes. One of the questions you answered was to give consent to share your email address. So we will be sending that list out to those that opted in next week. Enjoy the weekend, the rest of that. We have a handful of folks who have elected for one more activity because you are that enthusiastic and excited to design a creative and joyful life. The design thinking workshop, people who signed up, you're going to meet Christy or Megan in the back of the room. They'll walk you up there. It is a tight turnaround, but it's not super far. And the good news is you have lunch waiting for you. All right, so help us expedite while you say goodbye to your friends to make sure that you can maximize the rest of your afternoon with that. Thank y'all so much. This has been a real highlight, personally and professionally, and I really appreciate it.